The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading. Well, joining us now here on the program, always good to have a conversation with Christine McCracken. She is Senior Analyst for Animal Protein with Rabobank, and we're talking about the latest Global Pork Quarterly and much more. And first off, Christine, welcome back to the program. It is good to talk with you again. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, great to be back with you, Jesse.
Well, let's take a look and let's dive into the latest pork report out, the Global Pork Quarterly. And just for starters, can you give us a quick kind of overview, maybe some of the big things that you guys found with this new Rabobank report? Let's just start there.
Sure. You look at the global markets, and I think it's a little of what we're seeing here as well. It's been a slow recovery after a challenging year last year, a lot of uncertainty. And we see it here in our markets day to day, especially with some of the political discussions going on. But generally, it's hard to plan when you don't know what the rules are. And I think that you're seeing that not just here, but in Europe, where, they've had a constant barrage of regulation that may or may not affect how they produce going forward. Obviously, disease is always a big challenge. When we turn to China, obviously, they've got this ongoing economic pressure that really limits kind of what they're able to do from a consumption standpoint. So you take a step back and think about how the production industry as a whole should respond. I think it's just a lot of cautious optimism. For now, I think we're kind of pulling back the reins a little. Obviously, it helps that feed costs are lower, but no one wants to go all in, given what we're seeing today in terms of the global market.
Well, thinking about the global picture and some of those geopolitical dynamics, how much of an impact is some of that uncertainty having on maybe overall demand? Talk about that a little bit.
I think when you look at California and Prop 12, that's having an impact. It's hard to quantify today, as the data still isn't very good on that. And there are some compliance issues, maybe challenging markets there. But taking a step back, I mean, when you think about how we think about consumption overall, I do think that prices ultimately dictate what the consumer is going to do. And right now, it feels like they want to eat a lot of beef. Is the bottom line, through the grilling season. I think the second half could look a little different. You're starting to see, retailers start to look for some cheaper alternatives, maybe spread that out a little. So for now, it hasn't been maybe as good as we expected, but looking into the second half, maybe we get a little bit more support.
I find that a little interesting. I know typically during the summer grilling season, some of that beef demand is there, but I think about the overall economic picture in the U.S. in particular, and, a little surprising that maybe folks are still going for some beef, even though it costs a little more at the grocery store. But I think overall pork demand, seasonality, things like that, I think we know, Christine, pork demand is pretty resilient. So the second half of this year seems like it could be fairly good for the pork sector.
Well, I hope so. We have a lot of pork, so it's gotta move. So I do think it helps that there is a little less beef on the market, and it is a little higher cost. That's some good news. I do think that chicken too is pretty tight and a little higher cost. So there's some things helping us out. On the flip side, you think about where we are on maybe bacon, which is such a big value contributor to the overall carcass cutout, and the reality is that bacon's been a bit of a disappointment. And we have to stand back and ask ourselves, a little why. I mean, we're getting a seasonal run now, but it isn't what we expected maybe earlier in the year. And I do think that is maybe, guys just cutting back a little. maybe, instead of 3 strips going to 2 on that burger, right? So there are ways to cut back from a consumption standpoint and still eat a lot of pork. But it is having an impact maybe on what we're seeing, in terms of the cutout and the total value of that carcass. The good news is that exports are good. And that has been a good story all year, and that's certainly helping the ham market now. And we expect that to continue through the second half. So there's the good news in all of this for the pork industry.
I think another piece of good news, you mentioned this earlier, lower feed costs. I know grain farmers in particular aren't happy with some of these prices right now, but for our livestock producers and hog producers, they have to be fairly happy with some of these price levels right now to help out their overall margins, Christine.
Yeah, that has been a good story here as we've come through the first part of the crop, and it got in the ground. There were some early concerns, obviously, especially when we have so many animals to feed. But the reality is, a 20-25% drop in feed costs overall really help, especially when other costs like labor and insurance continue to be very high. But net, it really is helping the industry's return to profitability here over the summer. But as we head into the fall, we need those lower feed costs to really be able to eke out, a profit for the year. I think that the other piece of it, though, is it's given producers an opportunity to manage some of that risk, right? So as I think about it, those producers that are looking at these opportunities and hoping for lower, we've certainly had some good chances here to catch some lower feed costs, and that'll really help us through the back half.
We're talking with Christine McCracken, Senior Analyst, Animal Protein for Rabobank. And Christine, let's think about what we're going to see here maybe in the second half of the year. We talk a lot about China and where they're at in the overall global outlook for pork in particular, and really a lot of U.S. commodities, et cetera, et cetera. China's such a big player. Maybe anything you're watching in particular in regards to China here in the second half of the year?
Well, there's a few things at play. Obviously, their hog supply is down, and obviously prices are up. So that does help our prospects for stronger exports to China. But the reality is we're still facing a headwind with that retaliatory tariff of 25%, and that makes us a little less competitive into that market. When you think about where their consumption trends are headed, still a lot of uncertainty. Even this week with some of the economic data that we've had out of China doesn't really help us in that market. So I wouldn't look for a big increase in exports to China. Certainly things continue to flow, but I'd look for other markets. Mexico's been a big one to really pick up some of the slack when I think about our export outlook for the second half.
Any other things and big trends that you're going to be watching closely here in the second half of the year, biosecurity or anything like that? Maybe what are some other things you're going to be watching here for the rest of the year?
Well, there's a few things. Obviously, weights have been a big issue for us this summer. We put on a few more pounds, all of us, including the pigs. And that's really not helped in this market. Obviously, if we get a little hotter weather here, maybe we'd see those weights come back, and that'd be some good news. But as we head into the fourth quarter, obviously with the closure of the Tyson plant, it does call into question if we're going to run out of capacity, especially with so many hogs coming to market. We think the market can manage through that, but that is something we're watching, especially with numbers where they are. That would become an issue later, in the fourth quarter. And finally, I'm obviously always looking at what's going to happen with our export markets now, with that being such a strong driver for this year. Any weakness there, especially as we move through the elections, if there were to be any retaliatory trade action, could be a big risk to the sector, given that we send roughly a quarter of our pork overseas. So some things to watch into the back half, not all negative, but certainly some risk as we think through our markets in later this year.
Yeah, and I think as a good reminder, you got to manage that risk in all of these markets and use different things that to your advantage, different tools, etc. Just make sure you're staying on top of that bottom line in general. Of course, that risk of trading futures and options, it can be substantial, but just make sure you're looking at all the risks involved. And great stuff, great data in this new report, the Global Port Quarterly. I know folks can find it online, Rabobank.com. We'll post links up as well with our social media and more. Christine McCracken, Senior Analyst, Animal Protein with Rabobank. Christine, always good to talk with you. Thanks for joining us on the program, and we'll look forward to having you back on again soon.
Thanks, Jesse.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. You can watch our latest interviews with top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. It's easy. Just go to youtube.com/@MarketTalkAg and hit the subscribe button. Or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.